The aftermath of the Battle of Midway marked the beginning of the U.S. Navy's road to recovery and resurgence. Despite the success, the Americans were not immune to the weight of war, and the battle had taken a toll. The loss of the carrier Yorktown was a significant blow, but it was not crippling. By contrast, the Japanese had lost 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, all key to their offensive capability. Yet while Japan was reeling from this loss, the United States was already on the path to rebuilding. The U.S. Navy had a vast industrial base at its disposal which could produce aircraft, ships, and supplies at an unprecedented rate. The process of replacing and reinforcing its fleet would be swift, ensuring that the U.S. Navy would be able to maintain its operational tempo, giving it a crucial edge as the war in the Pacific continued. For the U.S., it wasn't just about replacing lost ships, but also about refining and improving their naval strategies. Lessons learned at Midway, such as the importance of reconnaissance, fighter cover, and coordinated attacks, would shape the future of the Pacific War. With new strategies in place and lessons from Midway burned into their minds, the U.S. Navy would increasingly gain momentum, moving from victory to victory across the Pacific. After Midway, Japan's strategic shift was one of desperation. The losses of the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu carriers had severely hampered Japan's ability to conduct large-scale offensives. The carriers that survived were often left with inexperienced or under-trained air crews, further reducing Japan's effectiveness in the field. The Japanese High Command, especially Admiral Yamamoto, hoped to rebuild the fleet. However, the loss of trained pilots and air crews was a blow from which Japan could not recover easily. While Japan continued to engage in smaller skirmishes, the loss of Midway was a serious blow to the morale of the Imperial Navy. In the months following the battle, Japan attempted to consolidate its holdings in the Pacific, but the momentum of their conquests had slowed. The Japanese offensive was essentially stopped as they struggled to replenish their naval forces, even as the U.S. Navy grew stronger by the day. Moreover, Japan had underestimated the strategic importance of Midway, not just as an island outpost, but as a symbol of America's determination to protect its territory and reclaim its dominance in the Pacific. Japan's inability to rebuild its fleet in time meant that it was increasingly on the defensive, unable to launch the kind of coordinated large-scale operations that had characterized its earlier successes. The Battle of Midway was as much a victory of intelligence as it was of firepower. The pivotal role that American cryptographers played in the success of the battle cannot be overstated. Thanks to the work of American codebreakers, including those at Station HIPO, the U.S. Navy was able to intercept and decode Japanese communications, allowing them to anticipate the Japanese attack on Midway. This intelligence breakthrough gave the United States the strategic advantage, enabling them to prepare their forces accordingly. They knew when and where the Japanese attack would occur, allowing the U.S. Navy to assemble its carriers in the right position to strike. The successful breaking of Japanese codes was not just about intercepting messages, it was about understanding Japanese tactics and operations at a level that gave the U.S. Navy a decisive edge. This would become a critical factor in future naval battles, as code breaking continued to play an instrumental role in countering Japanese strategies. The importance of intelligence was further emphasized by the Japanese failure to detect the American task forces at Midway. Despite having sent numerous reconnaissance flights, the Japanese missed the presence of U.S. carriers, which ultimately led to their catastrophic defeat. The Battle of Midway is often seen as the dawn of a new era in naval warfare. Prior to the battle, the primary focus of naval engagements was on battleships with heavy guns, determining the outcome of confrontations. However, Midway demonstrated the overwhelming power of aircraft carriers whose air wings could strike at the heart of an enemy fleet without ever having to come within sight of the enemy. Midway proved that aircraft carriers and their planes would be the defining instruments of naval power in the Pacific War. The traditional battleship was no longer the centerpiece of naval power. Instead, it was the carrier whose strike capabilities could cause far more damage from hundreds of miles away. The U.S. Navy's future success would be built around this new model of naval warfare. Aircraft carriers would be the core of every significant naval engagement, and the ability to strike swiftly with overwhelming force became the defining characteristic of naval strategy. For Japan, however, the transition to a carrier-centric fleet was much more difficult. The Japanese naval doctrine was still heavily reliant on battleships and battleship engagements, which ultimately proved to be outdated in the face of carrier warfare. The loss of 4 carriers at Midway marked the end of Japan's ability to conduct carrier-based operations on a large scale, and the Japanese Navy would struggle to regain the advantage in the years that followed. The Battle of Midway is often regarded as the turning point of the Pacific War, and its legacy endured long after the final shots were fired. Not only was it a tactical victory for the United States, but it also marked a strategic shift that would lead to the eventual defeat of Japan. After Midway, the U.S. Navy shifted from a defensive posture to an offensive one. With Japan's carriers destroyed, the Americans were free to press the advantage and launch counteroffensives across the Pacific. The U.S. would begin its island-hopping campaign, reclaiming vital positions and driving Japanese forces further back toward their homeland. For Japan, the loss at Midway meant that their ability to project naval power was seriously diminished. Although Japan would continue to fight, the loss of Midway was symbolic of the fact that they could no longer hold the initiative in the Pacific. Their offensive capabilities were severely hampered, and they were forced into a war of attrition that they could not win. Midway also became a symbol of American resilience and resolve. Despite the shock of the attack on Pearl Harbor and the losses they had suffered in the months leading up to the battle, the United States was able to recover, adapt, and ultimately triumph. In the years that followed, the Battle of Midway would be studied by military strategists and historians alike. It was a defining moment in the Pacific War and a clear demonstration of the importance of intelligence preparation and decisive action. The victory gave the United States not just a military advantage, but also the strategic initiative which they would hold for the rest of the war.